our focus this afternoon, we'll be looking at ways we can support social emotional learning and playful literacy learning. Our focus specifically today is on outdoor learning with our K-3 students. And my name is Lisa Thomas. I'm POPEY's program manager and a teacher consultant here, and I'm co-presenting today with my lovely colleague, Jen Kelly. And we will get started. So hopefully you got our pre-workshop email on Monday afternoon that included the link to our Padlet, which is an online collection of all of the resources that are bundled together that we're sharing in our workshop today and in this series of 4 over the next 4 Wednesdays in February. So you would have seen on the left there the handouts, then the Zoom link and info, and that's how we know that you're here. So you saw that. And then the resources that we've shared, that we will share during the session, as well as some of those provincial resources we use to build the workshop, and then the video that we'll share with you a little bit later just as we wrap up. So this Padlet will be the same one that we use for the whole series, and each week we'll add more resources to it. So by the end of February, it will be a very nice, robust bundle of resources that you can refer to support that playful literacy learning and SEL, including our focus today, which is outdoor learning. So our goals for the next hour, we'll be sharing strategies and resources and ideas to help you incorporate outdoor learning and time in nature into meaningful and connected K-3 literacy learning experiences for your students. And as we launch into things, we wanted to pose this question to you. What are your favorite places in nature, or your favorite place if you have an easy and clear top place? And also, how do you feel when you're there? So if you can just start to reflect on those and share in the chat box with us, we'll keep going, but we'll refer back to these. Jen will keep an eye on these responses as we move through the presentation. But just thinking about if you can share your favorite place in nature and how it makes you feel. One of the key resources that we use to build this workshop today is the book noted at the bottom there. So it's called The Big Book of Nature Activities, a year-round guide to outdoor learning. And it's really, really fabulous. And so this quote comes from there. I won't read it at you, but you can see that for students, so much of what we're doing and what's so important is that underpinning for their development and their learning and their joy is that they have that sense of belonging as part of a community of learners, and also that we can make some intentional connections between them and the place that we are in. So part of that is immersing them and exposing them to the natural world and building relationships with each other in the classroom, but also with our local community and the natural world that we're in. And so thinking of ways that we can carve out time and effort and make a commitment to do that within those hours that we have our students with us every week throughout the months of the school year. And so one of some of the interesting information from this book that was interesting and a little shocking, and I will get you to guess, you can put your guesses into the chat box as we go. How many advertising messages do you think the average North American child encounters in a day? They can pop your guesses into the chat box. How many advertising messages we think they might see? 40, 120. Thank you. Well, let's look at the reveal for how many? 2,500. Just kind of mind-blowing.
More than they should. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, the number of hours the average North American child sits in front of a screen each year. So that first one was in a day. This one is how much screen time do you think kids get in a year? So it's actually not as high as some of you were guessing, but if you think about over 2,700 hours, let alone thinking of what else we could have our kids be doing during that time, whether it's active, being outside, like we're focusing on today, even just reading, playing, spending time with family and friends, engaged in thoughtful conversation, exploring things they're curious about, drawing, writing. Okay, number of corporate logos the average child can identify. What's your guess here? So again, this ties in a lot to the advertising, but you think of so much of what kids wear today, even shirts and shoes and jackets with logos on it. Yeah, what do you think? Okay, let's see. 300. So you think of things even just like driving around, going to and from school, you might see McDonald's, you might see Safeway, all sorts of things. And then the number of native plants and animals the average child can identify. What's your guess here? Well, your inklings are right there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's 10. So just some sobering numbers for us as we launch into this hour. And I think it highlights the importance of how we can expose our students to nature and spend time there. And if we're not familiar and we don't know about it, it's hard for us to care about it. And so can we help bring some of those learning opportunities and curriculum ties for literacy, for reading and writing and social studies and science and even math? Can we make explicit connections by taking our kids outside to do some exploration and scientific thinking and noticing and wondering to help bolster and boost up their time in nature and what they're able to recall and understand and remember and care about their local community?
Well said. Lisa, can I give you some trends that I'm seeing in the chat room about where
Yes.
people feel where nature is calling them? So a lot of
Yes.
people talked about forests. A lot of people talked about lakes and oceans and beaches and mountains. So those were the main ones talked about. And a lot of the feelings are similar, which is really interesting because those are all very different places. But a lot of feelings of calmness, of peacefulness, of grounding, and relaxation. And we'll bring that up through our workshop today. But how interesting that we, first of all, are so lucky to live in such a beautiful province where we have all of these amazing places to go right around us. But just that sense of how much our well-being is tied to being in nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that calming and peaceful impact it can have on us, it's the same with our students. So even though there can be some obstacles, or you might feel it's a bit daunting to take your class outside and you think, oh, well, Cole's going to run away, or this is going to happen, or I got to keep an eye on so and so, or how do I manage everybody and contain it all? We'll share some tips and strategies a little bit later on how to do that. But if we can set up these inquiry-like explorations and routines, our students will really just lean into them. And I think they will thrive and they will appreciate the ability to slow down and get quiet and curious. And also, it will have that impact on their nervous systems as well. So I think kids will feel, in my experience with my students in the past, it does have that calming effect on them as well. So the benefits are huge, not just having that respect for our local community, but also those curricular ties and the things that they can explore and discover that they can then read and write about as well. So the literacy connection obviously is always at the forefront for us. But even before that, we know that their wellness and their care and their safety has to come first. And when we look at purposeful play and inquiry, it's a nice connection to outdoor learning. Thinking about fostering and modeling how we can follow our curiosity, what it looks like to closely observe plants and animals and things through the seasons. So our noticings, our wonderings, and our questions. And that will fuel further investigations and research and conversation, ideas and discoveries. So that happens when students are playing inside, maybe with Lego or blocks or cars or Play-Doh. It can be happening outside as well. So it really sets it up nicely that we can set off together as a class and a group to answer some big questions through observing and experimenting with the local environment right outside of our classroom. And often so many of our schools are lucky as well to have some green space and some plants and some trees, or that we're close to parks that we can explore as well. So thinking about bringing in that playful inquiry, exploration, curiosity mindset into our learning in our classrooms, as well as taking it outside. This is from the Ministry of Education, and it's a continuum of play for educators. And we like it because it's a good prompt for us to reflect on what types of play do I provide time and opportunity for in my regular routines, day to day, week to week. And our question to you as we look here, you see there from the left, it's the most child directed and free on the left with free play. And then as it moves towards the right, you see it moves towards being more guided by us as educators, to over on the very far right with learning games. They're educator directed. So there's very prescribed activities, focused skills. They're often tied with literacy and numeracy. So going from free play to learning games, the continuum there's a nice range of different types. So it's not a scope and sequence. These are just an invitation for you to think about the types of play you invite your students into as part of your regular routines, because it gives them and it nurtures different aspects of their exploration and their questioning. And so that free play, obviously, they're in charge. They're having to make decisions, navigate, negotiate, collaborate, communicate with their peers. So there's a lot of really powerful learning that goes on there that serves a different purpose than if we're having them do some learning games that are maybe tied to a literacy or a math center. So give me just 1 minute. I'm going to put some music on a timer. And our question to you here to reflect on, are there two types of play from above that you could think about how you could connect them to outdoor learning opportunities? So all of these examples in the photos, there's a mix of indoor and outdoor. Thinking about how could you bring one or two of these types of play outdoors with your students? What might that look like for you with the students that you've got in the environment that your school is in? So 1 minute to reflect and share. Yeah, so some really simple, easy things to do. Dried out markers to write letters, numbers, and words on the frozen snow. That would be fun. I think they'd have a blast with that. Maker
That's
space.
a good idea. Yes.
Yeah, sticks and other objects to create sculptures. Oh, making spider webs. These are wonderful ideas. Thank you so much for sharing those. And you can see the important connections and experimentations and learning that can be happening, and the kids think they're playing. It's very, very light because they're engaged and they're motivated and they're following their curiosity. Yeah, fabulous. So another layer for that, or another aspect of looking at this and considering how we can connect to land and place, it really does honor Indigenous perspectives. It's a way to bring those into our classroom, and that focus and importance on land and the connection to land, and how important it is to have that experiential learning in our local, natural, and cultural situations. So if we can take our students outside, allowing them to see what connections they make with the land. Again, you just shared with your suggestions in the chat box how open-ended it can be and directed by the students. There's a lot of ability and leeway there for them to lead their own learning with their own noticings and wonderings and questions. And so it could be just as simple as taking a nature walk or taking a story outside to read if the weather's milder. It could be as complex as studying a local habitat or environment. So someone shared in there about making that connection to studying what you're looking at in class about bears and hibernation. And how could you extend and reinforce that learning outside in your natural environment? And one activity we really love to share that's quite easy to do, and it's probably something that we may have been doing with our students already in terms of text and reading and mentor text and read alouds and shared read alouds and guided reading that we do. So this may be something they're very familiar doing in terms of texts and story that we can transfer to outdoors. So it's a routine called I Notice, I Wonder, It Reminds Me Of. So again, we're nurturing curiosity, and then we're building in modeling and demonstrating language and listening, reflecting, supporting that social emotional piece as well. They're learning, collaborating, and listening together. And through our conversations, by us being that proficient guide on the side, we can scaffold their cognitive thinking skills and help them to articulate and elaborate on what it is they're seeing and noticing and wondering and what the connections they're making. So it's a nice way to slow down, like you shared in the chat box about what you enjoyed and appreciated being in nature and how it made you feel. We can slow things down and get small and quiet and notice things in our natural world. And our students will do this and they will love it. I've had lots of experience with this with lots of students. And even my wildest, most energetic students that had difficulty regulating themselves, difficulty staying quiet or focusing. It's amazing what that time in nature can do to all of our students in terms of calming and regulating our nervous systems. So we'll do a version of this coming up next. So these are the learning outcomes for this activity. And this is from the Beatles Project. So they have a bunch of resources online, a really great website. Their lens specifically is outdoor science programs, but obviously with any of the curricular areas like science or socials, there are many, many, many opportunities and goals that also target and support thinking, conversation, reading, and writing about what we're noticing and what we're experiencing in that scientific, experimental, observational way. So you can choose either of these pictures here. We got a couple of little critters here out in nature. So we've got some plants and we've got some animals. And I'll just invite you to share in the chat box here. Choose one, or you could do both if you wanted, but what's something that you notice? Brown markings on the frog. The frog's legs are bumpy. The leaves are sharp. Yeah, you see those little pointy edges on the leaf. The frog is almost the same color as the leaf. So it blends in. So you wonder about that. Might be an opportunity to bring in some vocabulary like camouflage, talk about safety. So the bee's wings are a bit translucent. You can sort of see the pinkish of the flower right through the wing. Yeah, and the veins in the leaf are like a fan. The bee's wings are still. We'd obviously do this more slowly if we were actually outside with our students, but of course, because we're online and we just have an hour, I'll move things along to give you a short version of this. So what's something that you wonder looking at the picture? So is there a question you might have about what you're seeing? I kind of already raised some questions about the color of the frog being similar to the color of the leaf. Thank you, Jen. I wonder if the bee is resting. Catherine's wondering, why are the leaves so prickly? I wonder if a bee's wings change over time in their life. What kinds of flowers are those? We could go back on into our classroom and do some research together. Could be an ongoing project or unit that we study for a while. Yeah, I wonder if the frog is hiding from something. Okay, and then the last phase is it reminds me of. So is there a personal connection you can make to your background, prior experiences from what you know, from what you've experienced or learned or read or seen? What does this remind you of? I'll share something silly with the bee on the right. I always think of the Bee Movie. And so I can kind of try and imagine this bee talking in Jerry Seinfeld's voice. And that gives me a little bit of a giggle. So I might entertain myself that way. But I have a personal connection to the bee because of that. Yeah, photos reminding you of nature photography. Yeah, these are actually my sister's photos. Lori, the bee reminds you of your backyard, chewing honeysuckle, honey center, collecting frogs as a child, seeing frogs on hikes. This is a nice way to find out from our students what their background experiences and their prior knowledge is. And if we can find out a way that our students connect to something in nature, that's a powerful bond, and we can build on that and nurture and notice that with the continued conversations and investigations we support in our classroom. Yeah. Yeah, and for us, it reminds us so much of those times when we were kids and had that time to free play and explore in our neighborhoods. I had a ravine not too far from me. We had a pond in our backyard that had frogs. And so seeing that life cycle from tadpoles to frogs and all of that's quite fascinating. And it's very memorable. It was powerful learning, much more so than if I would have just, the times I probably did read about the life cycle of frogs in a book at school. It's much more impactful and lasting to have that experiential learning in nature and seeing it for myself. And maybe you have a similar experience based on what some people are sharing from their childhood memories. So thank you for that. So if the weather's not cooperative, or it's just all snow out there, or it's really miserable and wet like it here is in Vancouver, we can always use technology and find photos to share a photo and do this together as a whole class to practice modeling and demonstrating what it looks like to guide through this for some of our youngest learners. They might need that practice and reinforcement and reminder of the difference between a noticing and a wondering. So something you observe versus a question. And we can guide them through this, and this can be part of our routine. And as the weather warms up, it might be something we can actually do outside. But if the weather's crummy, it's something that we can mimic inside for a little bit of an adaptation. So thinking again about, this is from the early learning framework, thinking about place-based learning. And not only can we connect with the place and the land, the living things that we see and witness and are growing with in our communities, we can also engage with local histories and begin to foster and follow that curiosity about the history of our places. And so that includes Indigenous peoples having been knowledge keepers of these places for hundreds of generations, and the voices in these places. And so that's something that we can explore and bring into our conversations, as well as our mentor texts and our studies across with what we're reading and writing, and also for social studies and science as well. It's a really lovely natural tie. So a couple of different things we can do for taking a walk. And again, this is from Judson's book, A Walking Curriculum, which is fabulous. So they've suggested you can do a motion walk, what's on the move, and then a line walk where you look for a human-made line, and can you find a natural line, which might be an animal track. And then coming back into the classroom with these to do a reflection, maybe a sketch or a response, or a map to reflect the walk that you've been on. And thinking of doing these kinds of walks over time throughout the school year, how familiar these places will become to our students, and maybe they're looking at them in a slowed down, quieter, more observant way than they normally do if they're out there for recess or for walking to go to the library or to the park or to the fire hall. So here's 3 suggestions here. And then other ways we can engage with the natural world. And again, this is more in support of some of that scientific thinking that supports inquiry and exploration. So some of the language that we can use and set up for our students, how they're engaging with nature, we can set it up and give them opportunities to notice, identify, sketch, and label what they see. And then we can look at sorting and categorizing the living things that we might see outside. You see here breaking them down into different types of animals, and then as well the difference between trees and shrubs, flowers. And then some of the ways that we can use language in a descriptive way to communicate clearly what we're seeing. So looking at the qualities, attributes of plants or animals, living or non-living things, and what questions are coming up for us as we notice and wonder and connect to these things that we're seeing. So it really is a nice slowing down. And again, building in this routine over time so that as you do it more often and more often, our students are going to be really comfortable. They're not going to get caught up in what do I do? Where do I go? They're going to know these routines and really just sink into it, and thinking of that calming effect that being outside has on us, having that on our students as well, and slowing down and shifting their attention from a screen or a logo to looking at some of the plants and animals that we've got right in our neighborhood.
So we're going to take a look at some pointers that may be helpful as we're thinking about leading a walk or a hike outdoors, some things that might be helpful to remember and get past those barriers perhaps of getting outdoors. So first and foremost, absolutely we need to dress well and have our students dress well for whatever weather we're taking them out in. What to bring. Now, they mention a teacher, the big book of nature activities talks about a teacher backpack or a bag. I can't think of any teacher that doesn't always carry a backpack or a big bag full of materials anytime that they leave the classroom. But here's a few things that you might consider putting in a backpack, like some pencils, some notebooks, some jars for collecting things. I had the pleasure of joining a kindergarten class on a forest walk, and the teacher had local Indigenous plant cards with her so that they could have, so that students could refer to different plants that they were seeing along the nature walk. So definitely something like that would be absolutely fantastic as we think about those stats that Lisa shared with us at the beginning of the workshop about the number of local plants that students can name. Hush mode. I love this idea of practicing hush mode. Now we're in hush mode and explaining to students that that means that we stop talking and that we walk very quietly. Now, this is wonderful to practice with our students from time to time. Also, telling them why, why would we go into hush mode? We're going into hush mode so we can see and hear many kinds of animals and things in the forest around us or things on our hike around us. So very, very powerful when we work with students on the why we're doing the different, why we're making sure that we are following some of these pointers when we're out with our students. Oh, okay, thank you. Talking about a wagon, that's a wonderful idea to bring into the forest. Amazing. I'm sure that you have all of these things already thought through. Thank you. Halfway past. So thinking about as you're leading a walk, having and you see something really cool on the side of the path or something, going a little bit further beyond it. So about half of our class is in front of the very special object that we want to talk about. And then talking to the whole class as we're noticing it so that all of our students can see the object and hear our voice rather than just the people at the front of the line. Definitely, we are teachers, so we know that we generally need a leader and someone at the back to make sure we're not losing any students in our nature walk, but also having some kind of signal so we can bring our students back quickly and safely. And of course, transitions. I love the idea of how many nature noises can you hear between now and our next stop. For our youngest students, maybe we say, I'm going to ask you at our next stop, what's one sound that you heard and describe it to us. So just really easy, something that they can keep in their memory for that amount of time. Okay, so as I mentioned, I had the wonderful privilege of joining a kindergarten class. Now, this particular kindergarten class had Forest Tuesdays. Every Tuesday, they went into the forest, rain or shine. And there was sometimes a more directed way that the students were working in the forest, and sometimes it was more free exploration. Generally, there was always a free exploration part of the time that they were in the forest. So even if there was a focus of a directive that they were working with, there was always that time for some free exploration. Favorite day of all of the students in these two kindergarten classes that went out together. And look at all the things that you could notice and talk about with your students. Some students would work together and do just some dramatic play. Some students would get out a lot of energy by running through the trees and climbing over logs. And some students really embraced testing out different objects. So seeing the strength of sticks and having more of an individual inquiry. And some students really wanted to tell stories and make up stories. And I'll show you a video of that in a moment. But listen to the voices or the voice of this child noticing the sounds around.
Yeah, I hear you. I know what he's saying. He's saying, those are baby birds right up there.
So wonderful follow-up question that I didn't get a chance to record, but just the power of noticing. Wonderful follow-up question. Oh, why do you think that? Or tell me more about your thoughts on that, to get more of a dialogue going with the student around their noticings. Okay, so sit spots have been becoming more and more popular lately. And a sit spot is generally a self-selected spot that students can return to the same spot time after time. And in the spot that has been chosen, they can really notice what's going on around them. They can definitely notice changes in seasons, in animals, and insects, all sorts of different things. But it's all about having that very careful observation and reflection. By going back to the same spot, our students maintain a sense of pride in their spot, and they really like to talk deeply about what they're noticing in that spot. And maybe they're telling some stories that are factual or imaginary, or a blend of both. Maybe that spider is a really good drummer. So students might imagine the creativity that would go into this. Imagine what plants or animals are thinking or feeling. Wow, when think about like opening up those big questions to our students and letting them just go with it. They're using so much brain power of their creative thinking to really dig into that. And of course, all of the changes that they are noticing throughout the year, throughout seasons. So thinking about sit spots, take a look at these photos, choose one that would be your virtual sit spot. You're really gonna notice and connect to in some way. And write 2 or 3 thoughts about your chosen photo in the chat box. So I'm going to just give you 1 minute because we don't have a whole lot of time together today, but notice what you can, tell us what you're thinking, and have some fun exploring one of these wonderful photographs. Wonderful, wonderful. I'll give you a moment to pop those into the chat box, and I'll come back to take a look at some of the trends that we're seeing. Thank you. That wasn't a lot of time, so I want to honor your choice, your time here. Okay, some back pocket outdoor activities. Definitely we want to take advantage of those informal learning opportunities that we can introduce our students to, but we also want to make sure that we're not spending a whole ton of prep time getting ready to go outdoors. There's so many different things that we can do very quickly off, that are inspired by where we end up. So perhaps we see a fallen tree trunk and we do some close investigation about what we're noticing, what we're noticing about the environment around it, or the insects around it. We can also collect natural objects, and this came up in your conversations earlier about what different things that you could do outside for play activities. So collecting natural objects, and as you mentioned, making mandalas, different things, sketching. We can sit and listen in complete silence and think about the natural sounds that we're hearing and try and make some sense of that. Signs of birds, like looking for what we might see, holes in trees, feathers, especially at different times throughout the seasons. And we can do the same for animals or mammals. What are we noticing? Are there any tracks? We can look out in one direction, perhaps use a compass, and then decide that as a class, we're going to crouch down every 10 paces and find out what we can about that space. What is living there? What do we see? What do we notice? Okay, so I'm just taking a quick look at the chat box. Excellent. I love, Lori, how you mentioned about the turtle has some choices about his sit spot. So he's having a little reflection time there. Excellent. Oh, wonderful. The turtle one was really popular, wasn't it? And the beautiful colored feather. I don't know where your sister gets these beautiful photographs or takes these beautiful photographs. They're so wonderful. The patterned leaves, the snail waking up from a slumber. Oh, wonderful. So cool. Wonder if the turtle is awake. So many questions about these. Thank you so much. So here's the ideas that were brought up earlier. You could do some bark and leaf rubbings to bring that artistic connection back into the classroom. How could we use these objects back in the classroom to really bring the outdoor learning into our classroom to explore even further? And just some tips. I think that probably most of you know this stuff, and I'll just highlight a few things so that we are on time with our timing with everything. But setting some physical boundaries that students know ahead of time is really helpful, because you don't want to be the teacher running after the students outside in the forest trying to get them to come back. So going over those rules and expectations with students too. I don't know if you heard in the video that I just shared with you, but it was like, too far, so-and-so, call him back, so making sure that students know all about the boundaries of the area that they can explore, because so much of our time, allow time for free exploration. And I mentioned that when I was describing Forest Tuesday as well. Even if we have something purposefully planned, it's very important to our students to have some time for free exploration and allow that time to fit into our plan, I guess, for being out in nature. And having some safety games. So to practice how can we be safe out in the outdoors? What are our emergency protocols? Involve students in the planning so that they know, first of all, it's a very important skill for them to know as they go out and explore nature more in the outdoor areas, but we can make it fun with some games and things for our students to engage in. Okay, so let's take a look at our thinking about different aspects that we have been learning about today. So choose one of these aspects to answer in the chat box. What does it mean to connect with land and space? What can we help our students notice, wonder, and explore? How can we support our students' communication and thinking skills as they interact with the world around them? Or how can we help students ground their stories in land and place? So lots of different aspects of things that we've been talking about today, but share your connection, your thought, your idea in the chat box. I'll give you a minute to think about that and do some writing. And as you mentioned at the beginning of our workshop time together, that we talked a lot today about curricular connections and the learning that happens outdoors, but our time in nature, according to your answers as well at the beginning, was a time of happiness, was risk-taking, was stress reduction. You talked about being calm and being grounded, all of those different things. I would say self-confidence, resilience. You mentioned a feeling of well-being. I like to think of it as a sense of freedom as well, and that came up. And we, as I mentioned, are so lucky to live in such a beautiful province that often we can just walk out our doors and be in a beautiful, beautiful place, even if we're in an urban setting, because we do live in such a beautiful area of the world. And we love this quote: no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they've never experienced. And that really goes nicely with the stats that Lisa shared at the beginning of our workshop today, that we have the opportunity to introduce our students to this kind of learning, to these kind of experiences even if they haven't experienced that before. So we have so much choice and autonomy on how we learn with our students, that this is one way that we can do a lot of curricular learning, and also a lot of social emotional learning and well-being for our students. So thank you so much. This chat box is just amazing. Really, we're going to show you how you can save the chat, but I am getting just so many ideas from you, sharing how you can be outdoors with your kiddos, and noticing things in nature and helping them wonder and explore, just communicating ideas. Thank you so much for your rich ideas in the chat box. And I'm definitely going to come back to these ideas and share them with other teachers as well. This is gold. Thank you so much. And coming back to our early learning framework as a very important, one of their very, very important ideas, that they ground the philosophy of the early learning in this framework, is having educators collaborate with children and their families as partners in research. Now, this is beautiful because it means that we are not in charge of having all the knowledge, that we can work alongside our students, because they honestly, the students that I work alongside ask way better questions than I do. So I would love to continue that relationship of working alongside students, listening to them, experimenting with the openness to the unexpected. And I think we saw lots of that today with some of our examples, being open to the unexpected and to the unexpected learning that we can work with our students.